Now we're going to try and realize our total value study based on that photograph into a painting using color, translating the lights and darks into pastel shades, light colors, emulating an early morning feel, and seeing our cherry tree in a quiet, soft light. I'm getting started with a wash of some light warm tones, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of pink, to suggest morning light. It's very, very pale, but even with this pale wash, you can start to see that I'm thinking about the structure of the painting. The road is clearly down the lower third of the painting, and there's a bit of graded darkness to the middle of the wash. And the paper is starting to dry. I'm using this condition to help me. I'm going to be placing now some pale greenish hues, gray-green, painting basically the back trees, the distant trees, the trees that are above and behind my main subject of the cherry trees. Again, I'm using a pale color, highly diluted, a little bit of cobalt, a little bit of cad yellow, and thinking about some of the vertical trees that rise up behind the cherry tree in the midground. And I'm looking for, a pattern of branches, a pattern of trunks, and some boughs. And all this comes down into the lower third of the painting where it defines the slope that this tree rests on. So I move on with this light tone. I'm measuring it against the sky, basically, not against the cherry tree shape that you see emerging, but I'm trying to measure it against the sky, and perhaps a little darker up above and a little washed out below to give me the effect that there's sort of a misty, soft quality to the day. I'm extending this now, adding a bit more cad yellow into the foreground, trying to bring that area forward and at the same time create depth in the painting. But I'm keeping the tonality relatively close, a bit darker, but minor degrees, I would say, minor degrees of darkness as it comes forward. And now that tree is more apparent and the path is really becoming bright. So maybe at this stage we tone it down a little bit with some light application of color across the top of it. Working very much not wet into wet. The condition of the paper is sort of semi-dry, which means I do get some hard edges, but then I run into a wet area and the paint softens out. And this is actually a good condition to build up this sort of painting where you have an unknown factor in just how dry the paper is, and you build up strokes and the shapes of trees, sometimes resulting in soft edges, sometimes resulting in hard edges. The result we often classify as lost and found edges, and that creates a sense of atmosphere in the painting. You'll see at the end of the painting that the atmosphere is a big part of the sensation that we enjoy in looking at this image. Color-wise, I'm now switching to a little bit of a pinkish violet color using alizarin crimson and some cobalt blue. Tonally, though, it's a little bit darker, slightly darker than the background image. This is going to bring it forward in the painting. At the same time, it's going to push back against that foliage. I like painting this way because I can paint everything as a positive and use my brush strokes to create shapes, forms, movements, rather than trying to create it through negative painting or just painting around an object. So the tree is starting to come out. We can see the form of the boughs as it extends over the path. And it's kind of wetting nicely with the greenish, soft, cool background. This tree is slightly darker, and in places we're going to keep some darker edges for drama. But in general, we're trying to slightly extend the darkness of the tone that preceded it. A little bit of that darkness into the foreground, a little bit into the background, maybe some trees. In other words, we're trying to extend some of the darks into the background where we feel it's effective. Now the painting is starting to mature and starting to feel like we want it to resound in the finished piece. We do need to add some darks now and give our the presence of the trunk of the tree. Here's one place where we're going to be using darks a little more thoroughly. We want to make the blossoms feel lighter in color. We do that by, yes, some shading, but in large part, in this sort of painting where we have a very limited value scheme, the value pattern is very subtle. We use darks to play through the branches of the cherry tree and give us a feeling of depth and form in the cherry tree. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm adding some deeper violets and blues into the cherry tree trunk and some of the extending branches. I'm trying to extend that color too, where I think it's useful, into some of the periphery, some of the trees and so on that border the cherry tree. A few accents on the road help to bring it forward. Still keeping that quiet tone, which I like. I want to keep that as sort of the resounding mood of this painting. Not a dynamic, sharp mood, but a very quiet, still, reflective mood is what I'd like to achieve in this painting. So a lot of soft edges, a lot of lost and found edges. The tonal pattern is, we would say it's a large dark against a light mid-tone, but in terms of the dynamic energy, the tones are very closely related. And this is the finished piece. A slight shadow, some brightness here and there, but definitely a quality of early morning light created by soft tonal values.